Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the judgment on the definition of women in the Equality Act as pronounced by the Supreme Court this morning. There is a fear that gender critical groups are going to use this to persecute trans people and pressure others, businesses, councils and so on, into doing so as well. The government has said that the ruling brings clarity and confidence. It absolutely does the opposite, as I shall try to explain. But first, for daily news and commentary, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So before getting on to the judgment itself and what I feel the government should do about it in order to bring actual clarity and confidence, a bit of background because it is very important to understanding the politics, including of the government's position here. Transphobia as a major threat to trans people is fairly new. About 20 years ago, I was working in an FE college. I remember having my first trans student in one of my physics classes. There was nothing remarkable about it at the time. There were no campaigns calling for trans people to have their rights curtailed, no claims that they were a threat to anyone, certainly no major groups arguing that they were not even real. There was ridicule to an extent, such as like the Little Britain sketches, but no animosity or attempts to treat trans people as mentally ill or something. That all started a few years ago. That's quite recent. And if you doubt the fabricated nature of it, look around and note that exactly the same nonsense is being pushed in exactly the same way in multiple countries. The far right depend upon an enemy within in order to distract people from the fact that they are actually the enemy. Trans people have been around for thousands of years. How come they are only now, all of a sudden, this big threat to society? And not just one society, lots of societies all around the world, all at the same time. Now, this is organised far-right groups needing an enemy. Can't be gay people anymore, because that would exclude too many of their own. In fact, they've actually managed to turn some gay rights groups against trans people. And it's important to understand how the far right have confected this campaign against trans people, because I think it's important to understanding the reason the Labour government are adopting the position they are. But on this occasion, although I can see the strategy which I shall lay out, it's wrong. Labour have decided to adopt a general position of blocking the Conservatives off from their easy lines of attack. In broad terms, it has a very good chance of working. So they talk tough on immigration, on people not in work and so on, in order to stop the Conservatives doing what Conservatives around the world always do, claim to be the only group who will take on whatever invented enemy of society can resonate with the public. Culture wars. It's working. We can see it working. The Conservatives are struggling for culture wars, so much so they're now having to attack food. That Kemi Badenoch is having to attack people for eating sandwiches at lunch or corn in any meal is a testament to how well this strategy is working. The Tories are unable to fall back on their usual culture wars because Labour have blocked them off. And it's important to face up to the hard-nosed realities of politics if you want to encourage change. If you just want to complain about it and get loads of other people to go, yeah, right, fine. But if you want to achieve change, you need to understand you do not ever pressure a government into doing something which they think is going to cost them the next election. Doesn't matter how big your megaphone is. You always need to frame the appeals in terms of political advantage if you're going to succeed. As I've discussed on the channel before, people who keep talking about like politics in terms of left and right, they don't understand how political views work. It's not a one-dimensional line. It's a two-dimensional grid. Left and right are about economic views only. Social views are separate. And I get it how a lot of left-wing people, you may be in a community where people are also very liberal and you think, well, left-wing's liberal. And you may come across right-wing people who seem very authoritarian. Well, right-wing people are authoritarian. No, not at all. There are very right-wing people who are incredibly liberal, and there are very left-wing people who are very authoritarian and monocultural. Labour appealing to socially illiberal voters on some issues works. There's a huge body of voters who are left-wing, not remotely socially liberal. Indeed, I live in a huge region of these attitudes. But the strategy needs to be surgical, not a sledgehammer. Nobody's going to decide to vote for someone based on their hostility to trans people. Having met lots of people who are left-wing but socially authoritarian, conservative, illiberal, whatever you want to say, I can tell you Yep, they'll absolutely fall for the gender critical bullshit. It's not what they're thinking about at election time. So the attitude gains you few, if any, votes. But trans people, as well as their friends and supporters, they may vote against a party who is failing them this badly. This is where Labour are getting it wrong. Saliency in this context, when I use the word saliency, I mean how likely is this issue going to be a factor in deciding someone's vote? Trans issues are very low saliency for the vast majority of people, apart from, of course, those who need those protections for themselves or their friends. Now, as for the judgment today, the ruling is that for the purposes of the Equality Act, the definition of woman has to refer exclusively to biological women. They made the point that, like clauses on pregnancy, make no sense with any other interpretation. Therefore, this must also be the interpretation for other clauses as well. That's what they're saying. They're saying that, look, you know, you cannot say, well, for this clause, woman must mean biological sex, but for this other one, it could mean trans women as well. They're saying you can't have that level of uncertainty in legislation. And because in this part of the Act, it only makes sense for biological women, it must mean biological women everywhere else. That is the ruling. And it's important to take note of what this ruling isn't. However, the ruling does not say that a woman should be defined in law biologically. It's only for the purpose of this Act. The Gender Recognition Act is also law and will need to be considered for specific applications of law. The judges did make clear that their judgment should not be used too widely. The problem is that it will be. Now, I've already seen some gender critical groups issuing statements on what they think are specific consequences of this ruling, which I do not think reflects what the judgment actually says. However, the law is only as good as people's understanding of it. Seems to me that various groups will now pressure for changes to rights for trans people, which may be unlawful, but the only way we're going to find out is if those trans people or allied groups now take specific cases to court. That will be messy. The government need to bring clarity here. The judgment's main conclusion was based on the idea that rights relating to pregnancy can only be possibly related to biological women, not trans women, and that because legislation cannot sensibly be interpreted by changing your definition of terms, that the use of the word woman in the Act had to only include biological women throughout. But the judgment did also make clear that their conclusion does not mean trans people lose all their rights in the Equality Act. However, what those rights are is now less understood. And people are going to use that lack of understanding to persecute trans people and make it less likely that young trans people will come out, adding to mental health problems. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I've never drafted legislation in my life, but it occurs to me there is a simple way for the government to deal with this. We have legal ways of people changing their gender. Therefore, it is established in law that trans people should have access to the legal status of their reassigned gender. After all, why go through a legal process of reassigning your gender if it doesn't confer upon you any change in legal rights? Labour even promised in their manifesto to make the process easier. But what is the point of a legal gender reassignment process if the rights it confers are not clear? So make them clear. Amend the Equality Act. Now, it wouldn't require much parliamentary time. You wouldn't be talking about a root and branch change of the whole thing. The Tories would, of course, try to hold it up inevitably. But all you'd have to do is change a couple of definitions. Where the Act clearly means biological sex, such as for pregnancy, change the clause to refer to biological women, rather than just women. Then change the general definition of women and men to also include trans women and men in all other instances. Tidy, right? Really simple. There's time in the parliamentary calendar to do that, I think, without even delaying any of the current legislation. Wouldn't require sitting on a Saturday either. Could be done before the summer recess, I would think. In the meantime, the government could, by making it clear that they're going to clarify things, stop people changing their behaviour in terms of like employment practices, delivery of public services based on this judgment, because the government would make it clear that the current uncertainty will be short-lived. However, just to be clear, this is not what the government are proposing to do. They argue, as I say, that the ruling brings clarity and confidence. But it doesn't. It doesn't bring clarity because groups are now going to try and have trans women, especially because they never seem to care about trans men, excluded from what the rest of us take for granted. This is going to mean court cases where you have a flurry of court cases resulting in a new interpretation of the law. You are going to have the opposite of clarity. As for confidence, what confidence does this give to trans or cis people alike? It's going to terrify some trans people, even if the law still protects them better than they fear. But again, that lack of clarity doesn't help. As for cis people, how does it help cis women? Oh, it protects spaces. Yeah, those spaces where they needed protection were already established in law before today's judgment. What this does is exclude trans women, or it will be used to exclude trans women from spaces that don't need protecting, purely for the purposes of being shitty to people. It has been pointed out that this judgment only allows trans women to be excluded from certain spaces where necessary. But where is the legal certainty over where it is necessary? And although I see the government's position within that broader strategy that I described of appealing to as many on the left as possible, which includes a lot of people who are socially illiberal, this particular application, it's not just morally wrong, it doesn't make strategic sense. Yes, there will be a battle in the media if Labour make this change. Absolutely. It's going to mean a culture war, right? But years out from an election, it's not going to form the basis of a winning culture war for the Tories. Like I say, polling keeps making it clear. People do not vote to be shitty to trans people. Immigrants, yes. Some other groups as well, sure. But not trans people. It has so very, very, very low saliency that the government could easily fix this to no cost to themselves. And you know what? If the 2029 Tories try to launch an election campaign on turf policies, let them. It'll be just as bad as trying to run it on sandwiches. It'll fall flat on its arse. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.